Facebook. I'm going to introduce you to our speaker, Rona from the UK. So Rona Snelling is a freelance ELT author, speaker, project manager, and editor. And she's working currently in England. She's got a master's degree in applied linguistics and second language acquisition. And she's also authored numerous ELT course books for various international publishers. So she's got loads of experience. And one of her special interests is what she's going to be talking about today, which is speaking. So I'm going to hand over to you, Rona, and we'll be back at the end for a Q&A. So please enjoy the session, and we'll see you at the end.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much. Thank you, Kath. Thank you. So, hello, everybody. How are you today? So can I quickly double check that you can all see my screen well, and you can see the title page, How Can We Create Confident Speakers?
We can't see that actually, Rona. So let's see if you can reshare.
Yep. Let me stop and come out again. Okay. Here we go. How's that?
That's it. Yeah, that's perfect. Great.
Lovely.
Thanks, Rona.
Oh, thank you, Kath. Super, super. So hopefully you can now all see that lovely title page saying, How can we create confident speakers? So yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorite topics. So I'm so glad there's so many of you here today to talk about it and share our ideas together. And just to quickly reiterate again and say that you'll have a handout and the slides afterwards. So if you want to relax and not take any notes, that's fine. Do whatever you want to do. I would like it to be an interactive webinar, and that simply means I'll ask some questions, and if you can type away in the chat box, which you're all already doing brilliantly, that would be amazing. But as I say, if you just want to relax and listen and watch, then please do that today, whatever works for you. So shall we get going then? So what will we be looking at in this session? We'll look at examining what speaking is, considering the sub-skills of speaking, and we'll look at classroom activities and ideas. So that's the more practical side of things. So to start us off then, examining what speaking is. So what is speaking? In this picture, we've got 4 hands, arms, and they're all kind of separate and individual, but also they're all kind of connected and supporting one another. And for me, this is just like the skill of speaking. It's one of 4 language skills. So we've got reading, writing, listening, and my favorite, speaking. And they all interact with one another, and they all kind of depend on one another. So when one skill is developed, the other skills often benefit and improve as well, and that increases the overall language competence and confidence, which is what we're here talking about today. We want that confident speaker. So how do these 4 skills and these hands and these arms interact? Well, we compare them together with reading and listening going together as the input or receptive skills. So that's the information students are receiving, so it's a passive skill. Or it could be writing and speaking, so students are producing text, so that's an output skill or productive skill, and more of an active skill. We could put reading and writing together. So for example, in a course book, students might read a text and then they write a response, a reply to an email, something like that. We could put listening and speaking together, a really natural, beautiful pair, because just like we're doing today, we're having a conversation, one person talks, one person listens, and there's that natural exchange and connection. But for me, what I really like about speaking, why speaking is such an interesting skill, is because I feel it's quite a neglected skill and it's quite an exposed skill. And I say neglected because sometimes, you know what it's like in class, you've got so much to get through in quite a short lesson, or you've got a syllabus to follow, or a course book to get through. And sometimes the speaking activity is a really small little activity at the bottom of the page, or you've only got 5-6 minutes left in the lesson, and sometimes it's neglected and it's forgotten. Sometimes I think teachers avoid it a little bit because maybe those freer speaking activities where that's a lot's going on in the class, that's maybe a bit more difficult to manage. And I think it's exposed because it's not like writing. You know, if your students are doing writing, they're there thinking, producing, they're working by themselves, no one else in the class can see what their output is. But with speaking, oh, it's all there for everyone to see. The moment you open your mouth, the moment you utter anything, all those other students can see and make a little assessment or a judgment. They know where you are in your speaking. So it can be, for me, the skill that is absolutely loaded with potential anxiety and fear. This is why I feel it's quite an exposed skill. Let's dig a little bit deeper and look at the sub-skills of speaking now then. So what are the sub-skills? Could I ask you in the chat box, give me some ideas of all the different skills that make up speaking. What do you think? Grammar, absolutely. Listening, a good voice, yeah, that enunciation, sentence construction, word choice, vocabulary, expression. Oh my goodness, lots of ideas. Non-verbal, that's an interesting one. Great grammar, fluency. Oh, there's some very good words here which we're going to come up and use in the session. So here are some ideas of mine as well in this word cloud. So a lot of these, I'm reading the webinar chat at the same time, a lot of these have been picked up fantastic. So at the top of that word cloud, we've got non-verbal cues. And I love these because I do think that's still part of speaking, you know, it's the body language, it's the eye contact, it's the facial expression, the miming, the gestures, things which really help at lower levels when we're teaching lower levels, and using your hands, which you'll see I do constantly when I'm speaking. We've got biological processes. So those vocal organs, someone mentioned a good voice. So the shapes we make with our tongue, with our teeth, with our lips to make all those sounds and those phonemes. We've got the 4 language systems in there. We've got lexical resources, so vocab. We've got grammatical resources. A lot of you are saying grammar and vocab now. We've got phonology, we've got functional language, we've got pragmatics, we've got fluency that someone mentioned, and pragmatics meaning the register, the formality, the turn taken in a conversation, not domineering the conversation, allowing someone else to speak. And right at the very bottom, last but not least, self-confidence. And for me, when we say we want a confident speaker, that doesn't mean we're preparing our student to stand up and deliver a 30-minute presentation to hundreds of people. It's not that at all. It's just about your student feeling comfortable enough to answer a question or to ask a question, to reply, to have a little conversation. That's it, to have the linguistic resources and the self-confidence to be able to partake in that interaction. And there's another sub-skill on the right there, cognitive processes running down the side. And I wanted to look a little bit at what happens cognitively when we produce speech. But can I ask you a couple of quick questions before we do that? How many L1 words do we produce per second? And if you're not sure, have a guess. All guesses are welcome. What do you think? 1, 3, 10, 100, 3, 5, 35, 40. Lovely. Oh, lots of guesses. Wonderful. Fantastic. So how many L1, so our first language words, we produce per second? So research tells us it's 2 to 3 words, or 3 to 5 syllables, because we can have a long word and a short word, of course. Okay, lovely. Thank you for your guesses. And there were lots of guesses that were around that number. Another quick question perhaps, and there's going to be a bigger number this time. How many L1, so our first language, how many L1 words are in an adult's lexicon? Have a guess if you're not sure. And again, all guesses are welcome. To 55,000, 45,000, 50,000. I think 50,000 is the highest at the moment. 20 to 35. There's some fantastic guesses. Thank you. 1 million. That would be, I imagine that's true for some very, very brilliant adults. The average adult lexicon, according to research, is around 30,000. So it may well be much higher. So we've got guesses at 50,000, 40,000, and that may well be true for some maybe higher educated adults. So we've got those figures. Let's have a look at how production and that processing actually happens, how we get those words out, how we access that lexicon of 30,000. So I wanted to show you very quickly this speech production model. And this is the original model. So since then, there's been modifications and developments. But I just want to look at this one today, and I'll give you the references so you can explore this a bit further if you wish to after. So this is a model for L1, our first language speech production, and we're going to move from left to right. So on the left, we've got the conceptualizer, and that simply means when we have a concept, just an idea floating around in our heads. So it's pre-verbal at this stage. There are no words out of the mouth. It moves from the conceptualizer to the formulator, and that's where it starts to become a word. And we access that word from that big lexicon, and we've just said 30,000 is the average in an adult, but it could be a lot more. So it's just like a massive warehouse of words. So in there, when we pick one out of the formulator, that then means we've selected that word, of course. We've grammatically encoded that word. So we've chosen which grammatical tense is correct before we say it. We've also phonologically encoded that word. So we've thought about the sounds we need to make that word before it comes out of our mouth. And all of this is automatic processing. It's pretty much subconscious, and it's still pre-verbal. It's not out of our mouth yet. It's still all in here. And then we move forward to the conceptualizer, the articulator, the final stage. And that's where that concept, that idea has become a word that's selected from the lexicon. It's got the grammar, it's got the phonology, it's good to go, and boom, there it is. It's actually spoken output now. The articulator is the last stage when the word comes out. And we've just looked at how quickly that happens. So if in 1 second, 2 to 3 words or 3 to 5 syllables, that is how quick this processing is, which never ceases to amaze me. It's just insanely quick. So this is for our first language. So how about for our second language, for our students, or for us when we're speaking a second or third language? Here is that same model, and it's adapted for L2 speakers, very specifically that formulator section in the middle. So this is a hypothesis about what happens for second language speakers. It's the similar model, the conceptualizer, the formulator, the articulator, but the difference here is the formulator, because Debott believed that each language had its own lexicon. So if you imagine that, there's your first language with 30,000 words, and there's your second language with a growing number of words. Maybe you've got a third language, maybe we've got lots of polyglots among us who have 3, 4, 5 languages, so a different lexicon for each language. And within that formulator, there's 3 levels of lexical activation. We see them there on the left. 1 dormant, 2 active, 3 selected. So 1 dormant, that means all the words that are floating around in our long-term memory, but they're not going to be selected today. The second one is active words. So these are words that are potential words for production. They might get selected. We're making a decision with these. They may become speech, they may not. And then there's our third and final stage of lexical activation, the selected word. And that's the output, the word that comes. So again, within 1 second for our first language, 2, 3 words, 3 to 5 syllables, how quickly this is happening into our second language. And it's really worth remembering when we ask questions in class, sometimes we really must remember to stop and give time for our students to think and process and to answer, because there's so much going on with speaking. Please remember that the level of complexity and sophistication, this is only very small things that we've talked about in research and processing today. There is a lot going on here. So we've had a little look at the theory. Shall we move on to the practical now and have a look at classroom activities and ideas for speaking? So all different ways of making our students feel more confident and creating those confident speakers. And for this, I'd like to use this acronym CONFIDENT, CONFIDENT. So for each letter, we'll look at an idea or technique to help. So our first letter, C. Any ideas what the C might stand for? There were some good guesses on the Facebook page, but not what I've chosen for today. So I wondered if I could also ask you, what do you think? Chatting, oh, that's so important. One of my favorite skills. Creating, composition, communication, concept, conversation, compose. Oh, that's a lovely one. Yeah, These are lovely C's. Cohesiveness, cognition, cooperation. Okay, I love all of these. I've chosen classroom, so it's not one of those that were suggested, but I hope that's okay. Let's have a look at what classroom means here and why I've chosen it. Because I wanted us to stop and think a little bit about our physical classroom and our online classroom and how we can use that to better facilitate speaking. So if you think about your physical classroom and have a look round, is it easy for students to interact? Maybe your chairs are in that lovely horseshoe semicircle shape, and that's kind of nice, isn't it? It's easy to talk to the person sitting next to you. You can see everyone. As the teacher, you can stand in front for teacher-led activities. It's quite nice. Or you might have those little rows, and they're okay as well. They're good for pair work, working with the person next to you, maybe even the person behind you to have maybe a group work of 4. That's pretty good as well. But maybe you can move those chairs around a bit. If you're teaching young learners, you may have no chairs at all and you're just sitting on the floor, standing in a circle. You're moving from one area to another. You've adapted it to suit your room. And for online teaching, I absolutely love breakout rooms. They're so great for pre-assigning your groups and getting particular individuals to work together. They're great for us as teachers to go in and out of different rooms. And I also love that mute button and the 1-minute warning. I love the mute button for students who are maybe a little bit too domineering and are taken over a bit too much. And if you've given them several warnings and they're still not listening, you could mute them if you want to. And you've got that 1-minute warning, which really helps for a discussion to just signal, okay, it's time to complete. Make your decision, make your choice, whatever it is, before we move back together to a whole class. The second bullet point there is teacher to student. So can you think about your presence and your effect on the class? So where do you usually stand and sit in the classroom? Are you standing at the front? Are you leaning over students when they're talking? Are you being obtrusive in some way? Are you actually kind of affecting and stopping them talking? So it's not an easy one to answer this one, but I wonder for your next lesson plan, if you could think very carefully about where you can position yourself, standing, sitting, leaning, standing back, what you can do so that you can still listen and observe students doing their tasks, but you're not putting them off. It's a tricky balance, but have a go, have a think. The final bullet point is student to student. So what are the personal dynamics like in your class? Because we know what life is like. There are some people we naturally feel more comfortable talking to, and we love to spend time with them, and others that we're less bothered about spending time with. That's going to apply to the L2 classroom as well for all of your lessons. Of course it is. So best practice is simply to keep rotating your pairs, your groups, so that everyone in the class interacts with everyone. And they all get to know each other, and you get to keep observing, and you get to keep tweaking that dynamic and trying to make it as comfortable and as best as possible. So that's C for classroom. Our next letter is O. Any ideas what the O could be for? What do you think? Organisation, that's a lovely one. Observe, that's a lovely one. Yep. Oh, Arena, you have got the right word by choosing opportunity. I say the right word, I just mean the word that I'm using today. I love all the other O's, and we've still got observation coming in. Open, that's nice. Okay, so opportunity, because this sounds like kind of a silly point to make, but we've got to give our students the time and opportunity. And remember at the start, I said that I feel speaking is sometimes a neglected skill. It can be a bit forgotten, the last thing you do in class. So what can we do to create greater opportunities for speaking, to allow them more practice, to give them time to actually speak? So right in the middle then we've got STT for student talking time. What can we do to increase our student talking time? Well, at the top, one simple way is to look at maximizing the material that you use. So if you have a look at your course book, maybe you could add an extra discussion question at the end after reading text. Maybe there's a picture you could talk about a little bit more. Maybe there are some difficult words that you listen to in an audio that you need to go over and check that and talk about that a bit more and give some more time to. and I've got L1 with the down arrow. And for me, I do think there are positive reasons to use a first language if that's available to you at times, but a great way of increasing student talk time is to ask students to start decreasing their reliance on their first language, even for lower levels. Just think about maybe setting some goals, which we'll come to in a minute, to help with that. Teacher talk time down, T, T, T. And this is difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes we can chat away in our lessons and maybe we're not aware of how much time we're taking up with our words. So if you think that might be you, what you could do is record your lesson with your students' permission, watch it again and just assess, do a percentage, time yourself. How much talking are you doing? Are your instructions too long? Could they be shorter? Are you explaining things too much? Could that be shorter? Is there a lot of unnecessary, irrelevant blah, 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 chat? Could you get rid of that, make it shorter? You could also do this by peer observing with another teacher, which I love doing. So you just swap and peer observe each other's classes and write down any bits and bobs that you want to share, any bits of feedback, including how much teacher talk time there is and how much student talk time there is roughly. And you can think about it when you're planning your lessons. Think carefully about what words you're going to articulate for your instructions, for your explanations. I always do this for teaching lower levels to make sure I've really thought about my output and I'm really measuring it and making sure it's not overburdening my students. I just mentioned goals with decreasing the L1. So let's look at goals because they don't have to be big, amazing. I'm going to get 8.5 at IELTS. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It could be super simple. I will not use my first language in class today, or I will only use it 3 times, for example, with lower levels. I will take part in every class discussion. I will practice my what sounds. I will do one spoken activity outside of class, which leads us to speaking outside of class. And another question for you, if I may. What speaking opportunities could your students enjoy outside of class? Could you give me some examples in the chat box? What do you think? And then I'll share some of my examples as well. So a group project, speaking outside of class and recording themselves. Yeah, I know what you mean. I never had much success with getting students to do this, says Chris. Yeah. Peer work at a shop, lovely. Group presentation, conversation, interviews, telling their family what they learned. Yeah, always important to involve the family, isn't it? Debating, speaking to students, a talent show. These are lovely voice messages. Speak to ChatGPT, why not? Yes, excellent. Yeah, I love all of these. These are brilliant, thank you. So there's loads of good examples for you in the chat box. I've put out 9 examples here. You could print this out and maybe scratch them off and plan to do them as homework through your term, for example, or through the rest of the year before the holiday breaks. So you could send a voice note, you could role play a dialogue, you could just find a dialogue within the audio script in the back of your course book. You could read a text aloud. I love this one myself as a language learner. It helps me feel confident in speaking because I'm just doing this by myself at home, going over a text that maybe we did in class. There's no time pressure. No one's watching me. No one's listening to me. I really appreciate that extra rehearsal. So maybe your students might appreciate that. You could learn a lip sync, a song, a film scene for students who enjoy that type of thing. And I was going to say that's great for teenagers, but I've done it with adults as well. So I think it depends on your class and the dynamics that are in there. Make a video diary is one of my favorites. I think this is lovely for introverted students because, again, they've got that privacy of speaking, but they then send you this diary and you get this little bit of one-to-one interaction with them and you can get to know your student a bit better and you get to observe their non-verbal cues, see what they're struggling with, what they feel happy about with. That's a really nice one, I think. You could be more creative and have write, rehearse and perform a skit. A number of people said about group projects. So starting a podcast or a YouTube channel, that's a bigger creative project. That's fun. Volunteering in local or online groups. That's a really nice way of interacting with the real world. At one school I teach with locally, there's an activity which is always popular with students, and it's cat cuddling at a cat charity. And so students go, and they cuddle a cat. And it sounds like there's not much language, but it's so surprising because there really is. You've got that connection between a native speaker who's just working there in the center, who isn't monitoring their output. They're speaking naturally as they would to anyone. And they're talking about the cat. They're telling the student how to behave with the cat. They're talking about the history of the cat, and a really natural conversation happens. It's really sweet. So maybe there's something unusual like that you could do. Or you could just start an English club where your students are meeting and chatting outside of class time. So we've had classroom, we've had opportunity. Our next letter then is an N, and I'll give you the word. It's N for nice. So we want our classes to be a nice experience. Yes, we do. Of course we do. We want this smiling, happy face like this one. It doesn't mean you have to have a party in each lesson. It simply means we want a safe, warm, welcoming, non-threatening, inclusive, positive classroom. We want our students to enjoy their lesson and to come back for the next lesson. And this is borne out by research. It's not just a feeling that we have that we like nice places. So the affective filter hypothesis is absolutely one of my favorites. I think I mention it in every webinar I do. It's one of the hypotheses from Krashen's input hypothesis from 82, and it concerns the emotional variables of our students. And just as I've just said, it posits that a safe, positive learning environment means a student's affective filter is down and they are open to any learning. Conversely, if that environment is not safe, not welcoming, not positive, the affective filter is up. And I always imagine this as like a big stone wall built up in front of the student, and that protects them from the bad in the lesson, but it also means no learning gets in. So research tells us we have to work at creating a good atmosphere in our classroom, developing that rapport with our students and taking that extra time to get to know them, to allow them to feel comfortable, to allow them to feel confident about speaking and sharing their English with you. So classroom, opportunity, nice. Our next letter then is F for fluency. And what's the missing word here? Carolina, I think, was in there quickest with accuracy, because there's no way we can have a webinar about speaking and being confident as a speaker without mentioning fluency and accuracy, right? It's a huge, huge topic, so we'll touch upon it briefly today. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, and here is the first one. What is the aim of a fluency activity? What do you think? Speaking without hesitating, yeah. Being fast, speaking freely, speaking naturally, letting our students express themselves. Yes, I love that. Delivering the message, encouraging them to speak. Beautiful, lovely. I love all of these. Great. Can we jump to the other word, accuracy? What's the aim of an accuracy activity? Without any mistakes, correctness, loads of good answers. Yes. Accuracy, relevant to the context, correct pronunciation, correctly, lovely. So we've got a sense of what those two are. So thank you so much for all those ideas. That's fantastic. So I'll quickly say here, the aim of the fluency, to continue speaking at a natural pace with clarity, with ease. These are all words that I've picked up in the chat box. I'm just reading them now. They're lovely. For accuracy then, it's to orally produce specific and error-free target sounds or language. And by target sounds, that might be the language that you have chosen to teach in that lesson. So a little bit more information about the characteristics and the differences between fluency and accuracy. We've got the aims there, but then feedback. So with a fluency activity, we tend to let that continue and give feedback after. So it's delayed. With accuracy, we're grabbing any errors that we hear as teachers, so the feedback is immediate. And somebody said in the chat box earlier there, for errors, for accuracy, no errors, but for fluency, we can have errors, because remember, we just want that continuous speaking. The errors are maybe less important, maybe, is that true? We'll have to think about that in a minute. And then teacher to student interaction. So a fluency, again, it's a sort of independent task that your students are doing. So there's going to be minimal interruption from you, the teacher, compared to maximum interruption from accuracy. You're going to be stopping your students quite a lot whenever there's an error. And that's because, moving on to duration and output, for fluency activities, it's an extended task and it's a larger task, isn't it? So your students are going to be producing multiple sentences in a fluency task. For an accuracy task, it's a shorter duration, a smaller output. So it might just be one word or one sound, just a phoneme that you're working on, that maybe there's a phoneme which your students are mispronouncing and you're trying to work on something that small. So there's quite a few differences. And here are some of the just generic characteristics that differentiates them. But we often think of fluency and accuracy as being opposites and on different ends of the spectrum. And I'm not quite sure if I really believe that anymore, because for me, I think it's a bit like those 4 language skills we saw at the beginning, those hands together. Reading, writing, listening, speaking, all kind of depend on one another. So I think it's kind of the same with fluency and accuracy. I think they do depend and need each other, because I think in order to listen to something that's fluent, those sounds and those words need to be accurate. They contribute to the smoothness and the ease of the fluency. And we also need fluency to see those accurate sounds, because it's no good having all these tiny little sounds and not putting them into something meaningful. That's where the fluency comes in. So for me, they're hand in hand. They're very much together. They're not so opposite. Let's move on to our next letter. We've had classroom, opportunity, nice, fluency and accuracy. And I'll tell you the next one because I've been a little bit naughty and I've squeezed pronunciation under the I for intonation, because I needed a P, but there isn't a P in the word confident. So let's just, if that's okay, I'm going to squeeze in pronunciation through intonation. So what do I mean by pronunciation? It could be any or all of these points, a bit like all those sub-skills of speaking. They're never ending. It's a huge, huge list. So here we've got phonemes, that individual unit of sound. So it could be a short sound like ah. It could be a long sound, ooh. It could be the ubiquitous schwa sound, It could be a diphthong, so 2 phonemes together, a. It could be syllable stress in a word, confident. It could be the verb endings and past simples. It could be intonation. We've got connected speech, we've got contractions, we've got elision, but basically ignoring all of these fancy meta language words, I would like to just simplify it and say it's simply about how we say something. So don't worry about any of the other terms. Concentrate on how your students say something. Are they intelligible? Can you understand them? When they talk together, can they understand each other? We're not aiming for ultimate attainment or sounding like a native speaker or something perfect. It's nothing like that. We really want our students to successfully and confidently communicate whatever it is they want to say, and for that to be comprehended. And remember also that 75%, and remember this statistic, I'm going to ask you about it later, 75% of interaction, English to English interaction, is between non-native speakers. So they've just got to understand each other. And it's a great way of just encouraging them to give it a go. But sometimes I feel that students may not be confident because maybe teachers aren't that confident or happy teaching pronunciation. So would you mind if I asked you, how often do you include pronunciation in your class? Maybe 1 from rarely, 10 to always. You can answer honestly. Please feel free to say 0 even if you wish. We've got 3s, we've got 10s, we've got 5s, we've got the whole spectrum, 2s, 10s. Oh, thank you. Thank you everybody for sharing that, because sometimes it can be an awkward question to ask. So thank you for sharing all your answers. So we've got all different, all the full way across the spectrum. That's brilliant. So could I ask another little favor? If you've given yourself a 2 or a 3, could you have a little go over the next week or so, over the rest of the term? Could you try to push up that number from 2, 3 to maybe 5 or 6? Could you try to include some more pronunciation? Could you try? Maybe some connected speech, maybe some syllable stress, maybe just saying yes, good, maybe just checking someone's pronunciation to make it a little bit more comprehensible. Is there something you could do and squeeze in? And if you're someone who's chosen an 8 or a 10, there's lots of people who are saying that they do it in every lesson. That's fantastic. So could I ask you for a little favor as well? Could you help another teacher, give them an idea, something that you use to teach pronunciation or why you like it? Give them some encouragement as well, because being confident and sharing our ideas with each other will help our students as well. It knocks on for sure. So pronunciation, intonation is all about how we say something, but what are we going to talk about? Here's the next letter, discussion topics. So, and it's time for another question. Which discussion topics are good for creating confident speakers? And I want to see how quickly we can brainstorm 10 topics together. I'm going to have a look in the chat box and see if we've got family, travel, music, hobbies, sports, films, fashion, environment. You're typing too quick for me to keep up. We've definitely got 10. Pets, tourism, current affairs, lifestyle, technology, social issues, education, sports, gaming, AI. Okay, so that's 15, and I think that was under a minute for sure. So we've kind of demonstrated there are many, many topics. Which ones can you discuss with your students? Which ones can you use? I've given the answer, any within reason. So any and all of your suggestions are fantastic. The reason I've added within reason is really simple, because the massive advantage we have when we're teaching our own classes is we know our students, or we're able to find out if they're a new class. So we know what they're interested in, we know what they're not interested in, and most importantly, we know what might be upsetting for them and what might be insensitive. And those topics, they're not the ones you include in your class. And that simply reflects real life, because if we're meeting up with a friend and having a chat, and we know that there's a topic or an experience that was upsetting for them, we're not going to talk about it because we don't want to cause them any upset. It's the same for your class. So we've got those topics. I think I listed off about 15, but there's so many more going on in the chat box. So what can you actually do with all these huge number of topics that we've got? Well, there's 15 I've just mentioned there, which you could pop into these squares. But even if you just by yourself came up with 5 or 10 ideas, maybe you could ask your students, your classes, to populate those other 10 boxes in this very simple grid. Could they choose what topics they'd like to do? Because then they're not going to choose the topics they don't want to do. It's only the good ones, the ones that they do want to do, that get into this big list. And then you have a list of topics that your students want to do, or that you'd like to share with your students. So then you could keep those topics here in this board game. I just listed off, we had family, social issues, AI. You could put each of those in a separate box, and you could create then from this grid a simple board game. You could have a start and a finish, and your students move through and they talk about the topic. They choose a question to ask each other. They'll talk for 30 seconds, for a minute, or they might just, for lower levels, they might just make one sentence about that topic. You can grade that task according to the level, or you could cut up all of those squares so they're little cards and students can take a card and talk about it, or you dish out the cards and they choose which ones to talk about. The number of ways you can give those topics to students. Or something I really love to do with a smaller square, so maybe just 10 here for lower levels, you ask some quite simple questions to your class, and your students work alone to answer those questions. So you might ask a question like, what's the name of a sports person you really don't like? What are your plans for the weekend? What is your hometown? Something where the answer is quite small, because the students are going to choose one of those squares and write their answer in there. And then when you've finished all your questions, you can put your students into pairs or groups. They can show each other their piece of paper, and the other people can have a little look and say, oh, who's this? What's this name? And from there, your students have to ask and answer and talk about these questions. And it's more of a natural way of starting a conversation. You could also use these 10 squares to collect errors, or to write down the topics in phonemic script to get in that pronunciation practice that we just spoke about. So students then have to work out what the word is, and then they can do the activity on the topic. So we've just mentioned errors and recording them. So we've got to go on to the next letter, which is E for errors, because again, we can't talk about speaking and not talk about errors. So errors here, I'm going to define them very simply as an incorrect example of language. It can be incorrect in many ways. So it might be lexical, the wrong word is used, phonological, so the wrong sound is used, grammatical, the wrong tense is used. It might be irrelevant, so maybe the students misunderstood what you said and answered on a different topic, or they just didn't understand. The error might be something that you've just presented, a target language within that lesson, or it might be a fossilized error. So an error that that student has been making for a long time, since they were A1, A2, it's a long-standing error and it's going to be a tough one to change. So can I ask you another quick question? What do errors mean to you? Just had a bit of a definition, but 1 or 2, what do you think? Lots of 2s. Are there any 1s? Oh, I don't think so. Are we all going for 2s? Ah, interesting. Okay, I think I might go 1 and 2. Is that naughty? Maybe. I'm going to choose both answers because I think if it's a fossilized error, maybe that is a failure to learn because students have never corrected themselves. There's never been that uptake of language. But otherwise, I would agree with all of you and say is learning. Because for me, when you've just introduced a new bit of language and your students are trying it out, it's simply that. They're trying it out, they're practicing it, they're working on it. It's a work in progress. It's on the way to being correct and to being automatic. So what do we do with those errors? There's a number of ways we can correct them. And this is from a study which has stood the test of time, has been developed since, but it's 6 great ways that I think always work well for on-the-spot correction. Explicit, and this is where the teacher says there's an error and says there is a wrong utterance. Recast, that's where a teacher repeats the incorrect utterance with the correct language. The student might say, I go running yesterday. The teacher would say, I went running yesterday. Elicitation. So the teacher questions the error or repeats the sentence up to the error point, hoping the student will then make a correction. Like, you go running yesterday? Metalinguistic clues. So the teacher again comments on the error, but provides information. So they'll say, that's the wrong tense. We use the past simple form of the verb for completed actions in the past. Or a clarification request. So this is quite nice. And this is when the teacher says, so sorry, when did you go running? Or repetition. So the teacher repeats the error and highlights it with a raised voice. So I go running yesterday, but they don't provide the correct language. And for me, all of these are quite nice. Some provide the correct language, some just ask students to notice it, some highlight the error. There's a different ways of dealing with it, and some of them overlap a bit. None of them are better or worse. Choose which way works for you when you're working with your students. And you might also, for a fluency activity, just listen and use a simple feedback sheet like this to correct languages and errors that you hear. So this is, as you see, another very simple table. You've got the language on the left that your student has said, and you've noted it down. The feedback in the middle, so you could say it's an incorrect tense. You could offer some explanation there. And then there's another column to provide the correct language. But in this feedback sheet, I want to draw your attention to that bottom row. I'm really into water sports. And there were 2 ticks there, because what I don't want to us to forget in errors is that we're just grabbing all the errors that students say. I want also us to be listening to all of the output from our students and hearing all of it. The errors, the not quite correct, that is learning work, but also the good output, the excellent output that makes you think, wow, that's great, they've learned that word, or I didn't know they knew that word. There's some emergent language that pops up. Remember to reward and congratulate your students for this as well. It's another way of developing that confidence and assessing where your students are at and how well they're doing. It's a great thing to do to include that. We've got now to move on to our next letter, which is N. For what do you think the N is for? Can I ask you to have a guess? Any ideas? Natural, that's a lovely one. Nasty. That's interesting. Nice. We've had that one, so not that one. Networking, normal. I don't think anyone's going to guess this. I'll be very impressed if they do. Oh, Sylvie's nearly got it. I won't say the word though. Neutral, noticing. It's non-native. So earlier on, I gave you a statistic that I said I would test you on again. So can you tell me what the percentage is that's missing here? Ah, well done. Thank you. So we've got a number of correct answers there, and it is 75%. So 75%, 3 in 4 English interactions are between non-native speakers. So if you're a teacher of English and English isn't your first language, you are very, very lucky, and so are your students, because not only have you experienced this process of learning English, so you understand their journey, you've reached this standard where you are now able to teach them, but you also represent real-world interaction to your students. They are very lucky to have you. Our final letter, classroom opportunity, nice, fluency and accuracy, intonation, pronunciation, discussion topics, errors, non-native, and techniques. So I wanted to mention something on techniques and communication strategies here. And by that, I simply mean how our students cope with interactions that might be above their level of competence or outside their knowledge area. So let me show you these 4 examples, and can you tell me what you think they might be examples of? What type of strategies or techniques? We've got 1. Sorry, what do you mean? 2. I think it was on Tuesday. 3. They would, be really noisy in the morning. 4. So am I right in thinking you want to cancel your subscription? Pick a number and tell me what you think they might mean. So we've got Afua, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Clarification request for the first one. Great, that sounds good to me. Yeah, fillers for number 2. Listening well, yeah, I like that one. Listening well, eliciting, mirroring. Yes, lovely. All of these are fun. Yeah, clarification, eliciting. Absolutely. All of these are fantastic communication strategies. I've labeled these into and grouped them into 3 simple groups here. So as a number of people have said, that first one is about clarification. So we're seeking understanding, we're seeking clarification because we don't understand what the other person said. And then those number 2 and 3 in the middle, an indirect communication strategy. So this is like a few people have said they're fillers. So that little sounds, that word, and the phrase, they're really nice little bits to put into a sentence to give us a little bit more time to think. And it's also quite a natural way. It contributes to that ease, fluency. So they're nice little things to pop in. And interactive for the final one. So this is quite similar to that first one, clarification. The speaker is seeking clarification, but this time the speaker believes they've understood something and they're able to interact with that information and reiterate that to the person to check they've understood correctly. So are these important? Why are these strategies important? Do we need to include them with our students? Should we teach these little fillers, these little questions? Yes, we definitely should. Here are the benefits. So the benefits of teaching communication strategies: greater self-awareness of language, increased empowerment in L2 situations, last but not least, improved confidence in communication. And these 2 studies at the bottom of the page, again, I'll give you these references so you can read them in more detail should you wish. But the key things from these studies, they're super interesting. They demonstrate those 3 benefits of communication strategies, but how they did this is really good. That they actively, deliberately asked students to notice how they were using strategies. So the first study, they did this by having students perform a role play using communication strategies and then complete a questionnaire about the strategies they used to raise that awareness and noticing of the language that they just used. Nice and simple, very effective. The second study, quite similar. Students were given tasks to do involving communication strategies over a period of time. So those students kept a strategy diary at the same time. So they recorded all of those instances of language use, just like the questionnaire in the first study, over a longer period of time. And that helped them increase their confidence, increased their fluency, a number of excellent language competencies improved. So the final thing then, here we are at the end. So we just need to do a very quick recap to say we've examined what speaking is. So one of those 4 language skills. We considered the sub-skills of speaking, all those many different processes and those speech production models of how we actually produce speech and how that model was adapted for L2 speakers. And then we looked at classroom activities and clues for speaking using the acronym CONFIDENCE. So I wonder if I ask you, C was for classroom, what was O for? Can you remember? What did the letter O stand for? Opportunity, who was there? I think that was Clara. N was for nice, thank you. F was for fluency and accuracy. Yes, lovely, thank you. C-O-N-F. I was for, that was the cheeky one. So interpronunciation. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for writing as interpronunciation. That's wonderful. D, discussion topics. Yep, excellent. E, errors, that tricky word. N, non-native, and we've just looked at, that's a super easy one. T was techniques. Lovely, thank you. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for all of your energy and your enthusiasm and your fantastic answers. That's brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for bringing your energy and sharing your time today. I'll stop sharing my screen now and we can go through some of those questions and answers with you.
Yeah, thanks, Rona. That was great. So many great ideas and really, really interesting. It's a topic that everybody wants to talk about, speaking. So thanks so much for that. We've got a little bit of time for some questions if you're happy to answer them. So one question, I'm going to dive straight in. One question that we had a couple of people asking was, what do you do if you have particularly students who just do not want to speak, students who really, really lack confidence or are very reluctant to speak? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so that was me at school. I never took us. So that's an easy one for me. I think that's, if you can in your class, I'd really recommend one-to-one and using your first language, if this is definitely a situation would be good to, and finding out what it is, if they're feeling shy, if they're feeling embarrassed, if it's something that's easy to identify, or maybe it's because they're worried about particular sounds, or they don't want to work with someone in class, or really dig as deep as you can and find out why that is. And then it's always obviously telling them that you want to hear them and reminding the value of speaking, that it's a way for you, the teacher, to assess how they're doing, but more importantly, it's a way for you, the student, to see and understand and hear your learning and your development, and that now you can use all these words. They're not just here in your head, that you can produce them, and that's amazing. And it's just a little at a time. I think I mentioned in there about reading a text aloud at home. That's something I'm doing as a learner. So it's maybe asking your students to practice speaking outside of class in
That's a good idea.
and just sort of building that confidence. I'm a really big fan, whenever you can, of just speaking to each student a quick question now and again, one-to-one. So it's making sure you can ask them, give them the time to think about it and process it and answer you, praise them for it, and maybe the next time you ask them 2 questions, and just really gradual and slowly, and lots of encouragement.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Tricky. It is tricky.
And yeah, I guess the flip side of that is when you spoke about allowing other people to speak. Often, I mean, you talked about online classes that you can mute people, but obviously in a live face-to-face class, we can't do that. So do you have any recommendations for how to deal with maybe overconfident speakers, or speakers who dominate? How do you deal with that without offending them?
Yeah, exactly, because obviously we want everyone to speak, don't we? So it can feel a bit counter, but that sort of counter thing to say shush now. So sometimes what I've done is give someone, well, and in fact this works for both of them. For the quiet ones, you can give them sort of 5 paper clips. So if you're a quieter person, you want them, each time they speak, they give you a paper clip, and they have to get rid of those 5 paper clips during the lesson. And similarly with those ones who like to chat a lot, they've only got 5 paper clips to use. And then then that's the time. And sometimes I think I've had that with adults where I've just spoken to them sort of at the end of the class, just more informally, and just sort of gently said, we need to allow other people to speak in the group. And it can be, and sometimes they're not aware that they're actually spending a lot
Yeah.
of time talking. So it's playing it by judging it and thinking, okay, maybe I need to do the 5 paper clips or 5 whatever, or it's having just
Yeah.
a quiet word with them.
Yeah, it's quite delicate, but I love the idea of the paper clips. That's nice because it's very visual, isn't it, as well, that people can
Yes,
see
I've
how
used
much
it
they're
more.
contributing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Another question, lots of people asking about fluency and accuracy
Mm.
in speaking activities. So one of the questions we had, I'm just trying to see who it was. Apologies if I haven't. But the question was, do we need to decide when we're doing a speaking activity what the focus is? Is it fluency or accuracy? This is from Rinaldi. Do we have to decide whether we aim for fluency or accuracy in a speaking activity, would you say?
I would say it's up to you. I think if you've
Mm,
got a very strict syllabus that requires fluency and sort of debate level speaking, then you're going to aim for fluency and maybe use that
mhm,
feedback sheet to pick up on things and go over afterwards. But if it's like I'm doing at the moment, which is just sort of private teaching, then I tend to see what happens and think, actually,
mhm,
okay, today there's quite a lot of inaccuracies, so I need to pick up on all those vocabulary,
mm,
and I'm going to swap the focus, and this is what I'm going to do.
yeah,
So I think it's playing it a little bit, just judging it how it goes, because
yeah.
because sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say, I guess as well, if students are really, really engaged in a topic, then it's good to let them go sometimes, isn't it? And
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
yeah.
and
Mm,
it's quite a hard judgment call to make, I think, sometimes, because
mm,
if they're super engaged, you don't want to interrupt, as you've just said, Cal. But if
yeah,
they're making unbelievable errors and people cannot understand what they're saying, then you need to step in at that point. But it's about that
yeah,
intelligibility and that comprehension, isn't it? If
yeah.
they're able to get the message across successfully and well, then great.
Yeah, let them go. Yeah. Okay, great. Another question from Ekaterina, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, said, if the students are very, very beginners, so like pre-A1 level, um, what could we start with to help them start speaking, like right at the beginning of their learning?
Yeah, it's the basic things like introductions and just simple SVO, your subject, verb, object sentences.
Mm,
Keep it really short and simple, because even saying I'm from England and saying that accurately and fluently, that's still an example of fluency if you can produce that
mm,
spontaneously with some degree of confidence. So it's I don't want to say it's lowering your expectations. That's not quite the right phrase, but it's just being,
yeah.
it's just grading your task, that instead of having someone
Mm,
talking for 5 minutes, it might just be 5 words, and that's fine.
mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah, great.
role plays are a really good way of just providing the words there, and providing the opportunity that they can speak using words, or maybe only half looking at that role play, those words.
Yeah. And also when you're a very beginner, just being able to say anything is like, it
Anything.
gives you such a great feeling of achievement, really, doesn't it, in a different
Yeah,
language? So yeah,
totally,
that's a nice way to
totally.
start. Okay, Rona, thanks so much. We've actually run out of time. We had loads more questions, loads of comments, but we've run out of time, so we'll have to leave it there.
Mhm.
But thank you so much. There was loads of really fantastic ideas there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
for everybody listening, thank you for all your participation. We've got another session coming up in 15 minutes, which is about writing. So we're going moving on to a different skill. So hopefully we'll see you for that. Thanks very much to Joe and Melissa, who are moderating, and to Marcus on Facebook as well. And we'll see you all again soon. Thanks very much.